of Doom, chapters 17 and 18. Chapter 17, The Best Principal Ever. Mrs. Jules went from desk to desk, handing back everyone's history homework. "Nice job, Eric," she said to one of the Erics. "Well done, Eric," she said to another. "You better study for the history of cabbage," she told the third Eric. "The ultimate test is coming." The third Eric naturally was Eric Evans. He thought he knew all about the history of cabbage and felt bad when he saw his homework grade. Then he realized Mrs. Jules had given him Eric Bacon's paper by mistake. It turned out Eric Bacon had Eric Fry's homework and Eric Fry had his. They switched papers. Mrs. Jules moved on. "Nice job, Dee Dee, although your paper smelled somewhat strange." She stopped at Jason's desk and shook her head. "I was very disappointed, Jason." "Sorry," Jason muttered. He could barely hold his head up. "I was up all night reading." "He'll never finish this book, Mrs. Jules," said Allison. Suddenly, the classroom door swung open and banged against the wall. Everyone turned to see Mr. Kidswatter. "Good morning, children," he said. They stared at him. He had never been inside their classroom before. Mr. Kidswatter loudly cleared his throat. "I said, good morning, children." Mrs. Jules hurried to the front of the room. She waved her hands like an orchestra conductor. "Good morning, Mr. Kidswatter," the children said in unison. The principal smiled. "What's all this?" he asked, pointing to the 27 plastic containers stacked against the wall. "Toenails," said Paul. "Also fingernails," added Leslie, so the principal wouldn't think the class was weird. "Well, I'm glad to see you're doing some important work here," said Mr. Kidswatter. "Would you like to donate a toenail or maybe a fingernail?" asked Mrs. Jules. Mr. Kidswatter curled his fingers as he examined his nails. "No, I'm still using mine. Anyway, that's not why I'm here. I'm looking for a student to bang the gong on Friday. I figured I'd start at the top and work my way down until I found someone willing to." Every arm shot up in the air. Calls of "Pick me" and "Ooh, ooh" could be heard from around the room. "Oh," said Mr. Kidswatter. "I guess it won't take long as I thought." Me," begged Bebe, stretching her arm high. "No, me," urged Dee Dee. It was possible to know where Mr. Kidswatter was looking. He wore mirrored sunglasses, even indoors. Joy had both hands raised, doubling her chances of being picked. "You're the best principal ever," she called out. Mr. Kidswatter's head turned. "You!" he boomed, pointing his finger. Everybody groaned except for the one person he had chosen. "Me?" Stephen asked meekly. "You?" asked Mr. Kidswatter, sounding somewhat surprised. "Yes, you," he declared. "I chose you, didn't I? And I don't make mistakes." He strode towards Stephen, then placed his big hands on both sides of Stephen's desk and leaned over. "Be in my office on Friday at 2 minutes before 3 o'clock, he ordered. "You will get one and only one swing of the mallet, so you better not miss. You must hit the very center of the gong at exactly 3 o'clock. Not a second early, not a second late. There are no second chances." Stephen's right leg was shaking. The principal straightened up and headed toward the door. "Goodbye, children," he said. He stopped. He waited. He folded his arms across his chest. Mrs. Jules waved her arms like an orchestra conductor. "Goodbye, Mr. Kidswatter," everyone said together. As soon as the principal was gone, everyone crowded at Stephen's desk. "You're so lucky," said Jason. "This is the best thing that has ever happened to anyone in our class," said Jenny. "You better not blow it," said Joy, "or else no kid will ever get to ring the gong again." "Can you even lift the mallet?" asked Terrence. Stephen didn't say anything. He hadn't heard a word they said. It was as if the moment Mr. Kidswatter had said "you," someone had banged a gong inside Stephen's head. Gong, 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 gong. Chapter 18, The Mirror. Dr. Pickle kept two things on his desk. One was a bust of Sigmund Freud. A bust is a statue of someone's head, neck, and shoulders. Sigmund Freud was the most famous psychologist ever. He was Dr. Pickle's hero. Dr. Freud also had a beard. The second thing on Dr. Pickle's desk was a handheld mirror. Dr. Pickle checked his beard at least 5 times per day to make sure it was trimmed just right. Now, however, that was the least of his worries. He looked at his face in the mirror. His cheek was puffed out, his tongue was sticking out, one eye was closed, one eyebrow was raised. He looked like a big doofus. He gently swung his pickle stone between his face and the mirror. "I'm getting sleepy," he said to himself. "By the count of 5, I will fall asleep. 1, 2, thrubbledub." His head plopped down on his desk. This would normally be the time when Dr. Pickle would tell his patient what she was supposed to do when she woke up, but he was his own patient, and both patient and doctor were sleeping. Some time later, a car horn blared. It sounded like there was an angry driver right behind him. Dr. Pickle woke up. He had no idea how long he'd been asleep. It took him a moment to remember who he was, where he was, and why he had hypnotized himself. He picked up the mirror and checked his face. No change. "Now, what am I going to do?" he asked. That was strange. He had felt his mouth move when he spoke, but the mouth in the mirror didn't move. He brought his hands to his face. He could see his hands touching his face in the mirror, too. The cheek in the mirror was still all puffed out, but his own cheek felt softer and flat. He moved his tongue around inside his mouth, even though the tongue in the mirror was sticking out at him. He set the mirror on his desk. "This is very interesting," he said aloud. "Clearly, the face shifts to whoever stares at it," he realized. He turned the mirror over, face down. He hadn't read about this in any of his psychiatry books. He slowly raised his mirror, caught a glimpse of the hideous face that was still there, then quickly lowered it back down on his desk. This discovery would make him famous. He picked up the bust of Sigmund Freud. "Even more famous than you," he said to it. But would all that fame be worth it? What if someone else's face got stuck along the way? "What do you do?" he asked Dr. Freud. "There's reason it's called a bust. It was made of bronze and felt heavy in his hand." He flipped the mirror over and slammed Sigmund Freud down on top of it. The face shattered. Up in Mrs. Jewell's class, Kathy suddenly felt very dizzy and confused. She looked at the sentence she had just written. "I can't read this," she said. "It's backward." "Let me see," said DJ, taking it from her. "How did you do that? That is so cool." "Warm," Kathy replied.